Gandhi's Nonviolent Revolution in India by Sanderson Beck. Meanwhile, India was still suffering under British colonial rule. Gandhi arrived in England during the first week of the World War, and again he supported the British by raising and leading an ambulance corps. But he became ill and returned to India in January 1915. The great poet Rabindranath Tagore gave Gandhi the title Mahatma, meaning great soul, and in May 1915, Gandhi founded the Satyagraha Ashram for his family and co-workers near the textile city of Ahmedabad in Gujarat. When a family of untouchables asked to live in the ashram, Gandhi admitted them. Orthodox Hindus believed this polluted them. Funds ran out, and Gandhi was ready to live in the untouchable slums if necessary. But an anonymous benefactor donated enough money to last a year. To help change people's attitudes about these unfortunate pariahs, Gandhi renamed them Harijans, or Children of God. Later, he called his weekly magazine Harijan also. In a speech at the opening of the Banaras University on February 6, 1916, Gandhi said he was ashamed to be speaking in English, but questioned whether the anarchists' use of assassination and bomb-throwing was honorable. Yet he agreed that Indians must take power into their hands to gain self-government. Actually, Gandhi had not planned to say these things, but did so after he was interrupted by the opposition of Theosophist Annie Besant. Gandhi began wearing homespun khadi in order to encourage self-sufficient village industries and thus help alleviate poverty in India. In April 1917, Gandhi went to Bihar to learn how suffering indigo workers in Champaran were being exploited by exorbitant fees of landlords. He was arrested and ordered to leave, but as he insisted on staying, he was put in jail. However, the officials soon realized that the Mahatma was the only one who could control the crowds. Assistants helped by carefully documenting the grievances of several thousand peasants, and reforms were won again by civil disobedience. The textile workers of Ahmedabad were also economically oppressed. Gandhi suggested a strike. When the workers were weakening in their resolve, he went on a fast to encourage them to continue the strike. Gandhi explained that he did not fast to coerce the opponent, but to strengthen or reform those who loved him. He did not believe in fasting for higher wages, but he fasted so that the workers would accept a system of arbitration to resolve the conflict, which they did. In the spring of 1918, Gandhi was persuaded by the British to help raise soldiers for a final victory effort in the war. Charlie Andrews criticized Gandhi for recruiting Indians to fight for the British. Gandhi spoke to large audiences but gained hardly any recruits. He was experimenting with a limited raw food diet and became sick. Even after the war, the Rowlatt Act continued the strict laws against sedition. Despite India's cooperation with Britain during the war, they did not receive Dominion status, and civil liberties were being curtailed. Guided by a dream or inner experience, Gandhi decided to call for a one-day hartal, or general strike, on all economic activity. Many signed the Satyagraha Pledge, and Gandhi suggested making a continuous and persistent effort to return good for evil. Before that day, in Old Delhi, Gurkha troops opened fire on a march and killed 5 Hindus and 4 Muslims. On April 6, 1919, all Indians stopped working. Gandhi spoke and said that machine guns would no longer afflict them. 2 days later, he was arrested trying to go to Delhi. News of his arrest led to civil disobedience. Gandhi was allowed to return to Ahmedabad, which he found under martial law because mill workers had killed a British officer, burned government buildings, extorted money, captured weapons, plundered shops, and attacked private houses. Gandhi realized that now he must protest the behavior of his own people, and he announced a penitential fast for 3 days, calling off the campaign and declaring he had made a Himalayan miscalculation. In an infamous incident at Amritsar on April 13, 1919, Brigadier General Reginald Dyer reacted to the killing of 3 Englishmen by an Indian mob by prohibiting public meetings and then ordering his soldiers to fire into the crowd at an outdoor gathering, killing 379 and wounding 1,137 with only 1,650 bullets. The Hunter report quoted Dyer's own report that he was less concerned with dispersing the crowd and more intent on producing a sufficient moral effect from a military point of view. General Drake Brockman of Delhi also made the statement, "Force is the only thing that an Asiatic has any respect for." The Hunter report concluded that the moral effect was quite opposite from the one intended. General Dyer was censured and later relieved of his command. Gandhi was given editorial control over 2 weeklies without advertisements, Young India in English and Navajivan in Gujarati and later Hindi. More than 7,000 delegates attended the Amritsar Congress the last week of 1919. Gandhi agreed to support the Muslim Khilafat movement without requiring them to stop slaughtering cows. Instead of civil disobedience, he proposed a nationwide campaign of nonviolent non-cooperation with the British government. For the peasant, this meant not paying taxes and not buying liquor because the government gained revenue from its sale. Gandhi wrote to the Viceroy returning his war medals. In October 1920, at the annual Indian Congress, 14,000 delegates enthusiastically agreed on non-cooperation with the British and to end untouchability. Gandhi promised that non-cooperation would bring about self-government in 1 year. At the beginning of 1921, Motilal Nehru, D.R. Das, Vallabhbhai Patel, and thousands of others abandoned their law practices, and British courts as students, teachers, and professionals went into the villages to teach literacy and non-cooperation. Gandhi traveled throughout India addressing mass meetings, and imported fabrics were burned. He urged people to spin and weave their own cloth while boycotting British products, and he designed a Congress flag with a spinning wheel in the center. When the Prince of Wales, Edward VIII, visited Bombay in November 1921, protests degenerated into mob violence with looting. Some policemen were beaten to death. In 3 days of riots, 58 Bombay citizens were killed and 400 were injured. Gandhi went on a fast to end the violence. In December, the arrests began. By the time Congress met in the last week of 1921, there were 20,000 in jail. Some nationalist patriots urged rebellion. Although Gandhi believed that cowardice is worse than violence, he still believed that nonviolent action is better than both. 6,000 delegates approved Gandhi's resolution for civil disobedience of all government laws, especially those banning public meetings. Gandhi planned a massive nonviolent campaign in Bardoli, a county of 87,000. But news of how an Indian mob had murdered 23 constables by burning their police station reached him on February 8, 1922, the day it was to begin. Although this incident occurred 800 miles from Bardoli, he once again canceled the campaign, this time before it had started. Instead, he fasted for 5 days in penance. Yet the British Viceroy ordered Gandhi's arrest, and on March 10, 1922, Gandhi was given his only judicial trial by the British. He made no apology for his non-cooperation, which he admitted was legally seditious. To Justice Robert Broomfield he said, "I do not ask for mercy. I do not plead any extenuating act. I am here, therefore, to invite and cheerfully submit to the highest penalty that can be inflicted upon me for what in law is a deliberate crime and what appears to me to be the highest duty of a citizen." He explained, "In my opinion, non-cooperation with evil is as much a duty as is cooperation with good." Broomfield sentenced him to 6 years and hoped the government would reduce the term. Gandhi was in fact released after 22 months after he had an appendectomy. Perhaps the greatest block to Indian unity and self-government was the religious conflict between Hindus and Muslims. In 1924, an anti-Muslim book led to riots and the murder of its author. After 36 Hindus were killed at Kohat, Gandhi fasted for 3 weeks. He pleaded for unity in diversity, religious tolerance, and love for one another. After he approved of killing stray dogs, Gandhi was accused of abandoning ahimsa. He was blamed for killing a maimed calf that was suffering from an incurable disease at his ashram, but he considered that action nonviolent because the unselfish purpose was to relieve the pain of the calf. During the late 1920s, Gandhi wrote an autobiography, which he subtitled "The Story of My Experiments with Truth." This book was quite candid and humble in the way he examined his faults and his efforts to overcome them. In the preface, he indicated that his goal was spiritual liberation, moksha. In his speeches, he pointed out his 5-point program on the fingers of his hand: equality for untouchables, spinning, no alcohol or opium, Hindu-Muslim friendship, and equality for women. They were all connected to the wrist, which stood for nonviolence. Finally, in 1928, he announced the Satyagraha campaign in Bardoli against a 22% increase in British-imposed taxes. Refusing to pay taxes, the people had their possessions confiscated and some were driven off their land, but they remained nonviolent. It lasted several months and hundreds were arrested. Finally, the government gave in and agreed to cancel the tax increase, release all prisoners, and return confiscated land and property. The peasants agreed to pay their taxes at the previous rate. The Indian Congress wanted self-government and considered war for independence. Gandhi naturally refused to support a war, but declared that if India was not free under Dominion status by the end of 1929, then he would demand independence. Consequently, on January 26, 1930, he asked people to celebrate Independence Day, and he proclaimed a manifesto that India must sever its connection with Britain and attain complete independence. Gandhi announced an 11-point program that included reducing land revenue by 50%, abolishing the salt tax, prohibiting alcohol, passing a tariff to protect against foreign cloth, enacting a coastal reservation bill to help Indian shipping, reevaluating the rupee, reducing military expenditures by at least 50%, reducing salaries of civil servants by half, releasing all political prisoners except for murder, abolishing or controlling the Criminal Investigation Department that was targeting Congress, and issuing firearms for self-defense under popular control. Then, on March 2, 1930, Gandhi wrote a long letter to Viceroy Irwin informing him that civil disobedience would begin on March 11th. He noted how ruinously expensive was the British military administration that was exploiting them. Even the salt from the sea was taxed. He believed that nothing but organized nonviolence could stop the organized violence of the British government. Civil disobedience would begin with a few people from his Satyagraha ashram, but others might choose to join. Gandhi explained, My ambition is no less than to convert the British people through nonviolence, and thus make them see the wrong they have done to India. I do not seek to harm your people. Gandhi decided to disobey the salt laws, which forbade the Indians from making their own salt, because this British monopoly especially struck at the poor. Beginning with 78 members of his ashram, Gandhi led a 240-mile march to the sea that took 24 days. Thousands had gathered at the start, and several thousand joined them on the march. First Gandhi and then others all along the sea coast gathered some salt water in pans to dry it. In Bombay, the Congress had pans on the roof. 60,000 people assembled, and hundreds were arrested. At Karachi, where 50,000 watched the salt being made, the crowd was so thick that the police could make no arrests. The jails were filled with at least 60,000 offenders. Amazingly enough, there was practically no violence at all. The people did not want Gandhi to cancel the movement. Gandhi was arrested before he could invade the Dharasana salt works, but the poet Sarojini Naidu led 2,500 volunteers and warned them not to resist the blows of the police. According to an eyewitness account by the United Press reporter Webb Miller, they continued to march in hour after hour and were beaten down with steel-shod lathis by the 400 police. But they did not try to fight back, and the injured were dragged away by women. The poet Tagore declared that Europe had lost her moral prestige in Asia. Soon more than 100,000 Indians were in prison, including almost all the leaders. Gandhi was called to meet with Viceroy Irwin 8 times. Lord Irwin wanted the civil disobedience ended, but Gandhi demanded an inquiry into the police brutality. Finally, on March 5, 1931, they signed the Delhi Pact that treated India as an equal with England and provided for constitutional issues to be discussed at a roundtable conference in London. Civil disobedience was called off, prisoners were released, and salt manufacture was permitted on the coast. Gandhi traveled to London, where he met Charlie Chaplin, George Bernard Shaw, and Maria Montessori, among others. Not having seen a movie, Gandhi did not know who Chaplin was, but his criticisms of modern civilization may have influenced his film Modern Times. Gandhi spoke for a half hour on radio to the United States about a nonviolent way better than brute force to fight for freedom that is more consistent with human dignity. He appealed to the conscience of the world to rescue his people, who were dying in order to regain liberty. In discussing relations with the British, he said he did not want isolated independence, but voluntary interdependence based on love. However, the British Labour Party had been replaced by a coalition led by Ramsay MacDonald, and they used the Indian minorities' problems to divide the Indian Congress. In his final speech at the conference on November 30th, 1931, Gandhi said he still wanted complete independence and warned, "Today you have to fight the school of terrorists, which is there with your disciplined and organized terrorism, because you will be blind to the facts or the writing on the wall." Back in India at the beginning of 1932, communication with the Viceroy broke down over the threat of civil disobedience, and Gandhi was arrested. As during the Salt campaign, the old Regulation 25 of 1827 was used to detain him indefinitely without a trial. While in the Yaravdov jail, Gandhi fasted on behalf of the Harijans because they had been given a separate electorate. It was to be a fast unto death unless he could awaken the Hindu conscience. On September 21, 1932, millions of Indians fasted with him for 24 hours. 3 days later, the Yaravdov Pact was signed, and it was ratified the next day. After an overwhelming vote in favor of it, Hindu temples were opened to untouchables for the first time. Gandhi replaced Young India with the weekly Harijan. Still concerned about the Harijans, he fasted for 3 weeks in May 1933. British officials, afraid he might die, released him from prison. In August 1933, he was arrested again and was sentenced to 1 year. On the 7th day of his fast, he was released unconditionally in a very precarious condition. After he recovered, Gandhi went on a speaking tour and raised money for the Harijans, untouchables, traveling more than 12,000 miles. In May 1934, the All India Congress endorsed Gandhi's proposal to call off the civil disobedience campaign except for specific grievances. By the time the Second World War was approaching, Gandhi had been confirmed in his pacifist principles. He pointed out how Abyssinia could have used nonviolence against Mussolini, and he recommended it to the Czechs and China. He suggested, if it is brave, as it is, to die to a man fighting against odds, it is braver still to refuse to fight and yet to refuse to yield to the usurper. As early as 1938, he exhorted the Jews to stand up for their rights and die, if necessary, as martyrs, so that a degrading manhunt could be turned into a calm and determined stand. Gandhi even recommended the British use nonviolent methods to fight Hitler. No longer could he support any kind of war or killing. On December 24, 1938, he wrote, "How can nonviolence combat aerial warfare, seeing that there are no personal contacts? The reply to this is that behind the death-dealing bomb, there is the human hand that releases it, and behind that still is the human heart that sets the hand in motion, and that the back of the policy of terrorism is the assumption that terrorism, if applied in a sufficient measure, will produce the desired result, namely, bend the adversary to the tyrant's will. But supposing a people make up their mind that they will never do the tyrant's will, nor retaliate with the tyrant's own methods, the tyrant will not find it worth his while to go on with this terrorism." He even wrote an open letter to Hitler himself, asking him not to go to war. In April 1939, Gandhi prophesied that before the war ended, the democracies would have adopted the tactics of the fascists and Nazis, including conscription and methods of force to compel and exact obedience. Calling for mass satyagraha in defiance of the ban on propaganda against the war, Gandhi promised Congress he would stay out of jail. But his disciple Vinoba Bhave was arrested in October 1940, and about 15,000 were imprisoned by May 1941. The next year, Gandhi wrote, "Supposing that the women and children of Europe became fired with a love of humanity, they would take the men by storm and reduce militarism to nothingness in an incredibly short time." He suggested ways to resist the Japanese nonviolently, though he also said that if India had a national government, it should ally itself with the United Nations against the fascist powers. He criticized the Japanese for attacking China and predicted that their ambition would fail and might prevent the World Federation and Brotherhood, without which there can be no hope for humanity. Gandhi was concerned that the British presence would invite the Japanese to invade India. So, on July 14, 1942, the Congress Working Committee adopted the famous Quit India resolution, and on August 7th, the massive nonviolent struggle began under the leadership of Gandhi. 2 days later, he and the other leaders were arrested, and Congress was declared illegal. The paper Harijan was put under a ban and was not allowed to publish again until 1946. Thus, for 3.5 years, we have little or no writing from Gandhi. While he was detained at the Aga Khan Palace, he complained that the government was spreading rumors that he was encouraging violent activities. He announced a 3-week fast to seek justice from God because the government had denied him justice. Although the viceroy warned him that he would consider a fast by Gandhi political blackmail and would let him die, Gandhi disagreed and began fasting on February 10, 1943. If he had not taken some lime juice with his water, he probably would have died. Gandhi's release from prison on May 5, 1944, has been called the end of the Gandhian era. When the war ended, Gandhi hoped for a real peace based on freedom and equality for all races and nations. He contrasted nonviolence to the horrible violence of the atomic bomb, and he called the use of this weapon on Japan cowardice. In his last years, he became more of a socialist because he believed that inequality breeds violence while equality produces nonviolence. He went on a pilgrimage to Noakhali to help the poor. Independence for India was now imminent, but the Muslim leader Jinnah was holding out for the creation of a separate state of Pakistan. In a last-ditch effort to salvage Indian unity, on April 1, 1947, Gandhi proposed that Jinnah and his Muslim League control the new government. But this was considered impractical as partition became inevitable. 2 weeks later, the last viceroy, Mountbatten, and Gandhi did get Jinnah to sign with them the following statement: "We denounce for all time the use of force to achieve political ends, and we call upon all the communities of India, to whatever persuasion they may belong, not only to refrain from all acts of violence and disorder, but also to avoid both in speech and writing any word which might be construed as an incitement of such acts." Gandhi prayed for unity and tolerance, and he even read from the Quran at his prayer meetings. Hindus attacked him because they thought he was partial to Muslims, but Muslims demanded he let them have Pakistan. Gandhi went to Calcutta to calm the Hindu-Muslim strife and violence, and on August 15, 1947, the long-awaited Independence Day for India, he fasted and prayed there instead of going to the ceremonies at Delhi. On the 1st of September, he fasted again, and he only broke it 3 days later after municipal officials assured him that there had been no violence for 24 hours. The princely state of Kashmir was invaded by Muslim tribesmen and Pakistani troops. The Hindu Maharaja asked to join the Indian Union and said he intended to appoint the Muslim Sheikh Abdullah prime minister, whose National Conference Party also appealed to India to repel the invaders. On October 29, 1947, India announced the accession of Kashmir and sent in troops. Gandhi was criticized for approving this action, but he believed it was justified in these circumstances because not to stand one's ground to defend oneself against an aggressor would be cowardice. Although he may not help one retaliate, Gandhi believed that he must not let a coward find shelter behind the guise of nonviolence. His last fast began on January 13, 1948, and on the third day, the Indian cabinet followed Gandhi's advice and agreed to pay the £40 million from United India's assets that they had withheld from Pakistan because of Kashmir. Gandhi's kidneys were not functioning well, and on January 18th, Congress got the Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Jews, and other religious groups to sign a peace agreement. On that day, he ended his fast. Although this religious hatred saddened Gandhi, India had gained her independence, accomplishing the greatest nonviolent revolution in the history of the world. Finally, Gandhi was assassinated by a small Hindu conspiracy on January 30th, 1948, at a prayer meeting. With his last breath, the Mahatma chanted the name of God.